Everything you need to know about the Vigo Dem Party. So sit back, relax, and watch from anywhere. Get ready for a chat with a chair.
I'm Joe Etling, Chair of the Vigo County Democratic Central Committee, and welcome to the award-winning Chat with the Chair. We're delighted you could join us. We got an awesome show tonight. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right to our first guest. Tell our viewers who you are.
Well, hello, viewers. I'm Terry Lee Ward, one-time resident of Terre Haute, and grew up here and enjoyed my life here to a certain degree.
Well, Terry, we're delighted you could join us and for the Chat with the Chair. Your first time in the chat.
Yes.
And you know, one thing about Terry, and we've had an opportunity to run into Terry quite frequently at many community activities here over the last 30 days, you are always impeccably dressed.
Thank you.
You know that? So it seemed only appropriate that when you came in here, you got to be part of the trademark blazer for the Chat with the Chair. So what do you think, Terry?
I like it.
Do you?
I have a blazer similar to this.
Is that right?
I do.
Well, I know that you would wear it well, so we appreciate those high compliments from you. So give our viewers a little bit more about your background, growing up here in Terre Haute, and then where you are now.
Growing up here in Terre Haute, I was a little poor boy, lived out on the north side. Life was not very well, was not very good.
Now, what was the north side at that time in your life?
Growing up on 15th and a half and North Street in Terre Haute, down off of Lafayette and Lafayette and North Street. Right, you cross the bridge and you go into what they call Highland.
We've talked a little bit Highland on this show. We've had some guests from Highland, and that was a well thought of area from the people who live there.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was an area where you supported one another, black and white. We were all poor and we all had a need to survive. So we supported, if you needed sugar, you go over here. If you needed eggs, you go over here. And maybe we could give some bologna, but that was maybe only once a week. Had bologna, that would be the meat. So, yeah, had some very good friends from there and was thankful that our mother kept us all together over there.
That's great. So talk about your family.
I'm the oldest of 10. My mother recently passed about a year and a half ago. I was given the duty, me and my sister, she was on life support, to say when to take her off of life support. We just got together as a family, all brothers and sisters of Evangeline. We call ourselves the Evangelites. And we got together about 2 weeks ago. First time we'd been together since Mother had passed.
Wow.
We were not all raised together. Some of them were in different parts of the family. But we always kept our family connection as brothers and sisters. We have, my mother had 10 of us, 5 of us by different fathers. So she was a struggling woman doing whatever it is she could do to help us survive, because she was husbandless until about the last 5 children were born. But he was an alcoholic. So by being the oldest of 10, I was the responsible one for everybody. Still to this day. And I have 6 children of my own. But I still have brothers, and I don't necessarily say sisters, but brothers who depend on me for assistance from time to time.
So were you educated in Terre Haute?
I was educated at Lang School. I had, as a matter of fact, the mayor of Terre Haute at one time was my gym coach, Pete Chalos.
Is that right?
Growing up, being the oldest, I was kind of out of control, and Pete Chalos was the first man that ever put me in control. And in 6th grade, I'll never forget, he snatched me up, because I was the biggest guy. I've been 6'3" since I was 12 years old.
Is that right?
And later on in life, I asked him, I said, why did you do that to me back in 6th grade? He said, because I knew if I get the biggest one, everybody else is going to follow. And that's exactly what happened. I went to McLean Junior High School. Then I was sent away to Chicago, where I went to Catholic school for 1 year to play basketball there. I came back to Terre Haute, went to Schulte for 2 years, played basketball there. Dropped out of high school and went to the military.
Is that right?
Because we had a family need for income.
Because you were quite an athlete back in the day, they say.
Is that what they say?
That's what they say.
Well, I wasn't good enough, 'cause I didn't make the pro money. But I was good enough to keep moving forward. Because I did play on Marine Corps team when I was in Marine Corps, yeah.
But it was a family situation that kind of had the military calling, is that right?
Yeah. Family situation, and then I got in a little trouble. And I don't remember the judge's name, but he gave me an opportunity rather to go to jail, go to military. And I had gotten drafted anyway. And so instead of going to the Army, I chose to go to the Marine Corps. I wanted to know what it was like to be able to defend myself and take care of other people.
And talk to us about that experience.
Marine Corps was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. The judge who gave me the opportunity, I appreciate him to this day, even though I don't remember his name, but I appreciate what he did to me. He gave me a break at a time when probably if he hadn't, prison probably would have been my lifestyle. But going to the Marine Corps taught me some discipline that I didn't have by not having a father figure. And my father figure in most cases was John Wayne on TV. Well, that wasn't a true father figure. But going to the Marine Corps taught me respect for authority, taught me how to work. Although I worked many a day, and they'd send me to Wisconsin to work in the dairy farms from about 13 to about 16. So I knew how to work, but it just gave me a different aspect of thinking about what I wanted to do in my lifetime. And it was a good life.
So how long did you spend in the Marine Corps?
Spent 2 years in the Marine Corps. That was the hitch that I had because I signed up, and I actually became a personal secretary for a colonel. I got orders to go to Vietnam twice, and he rescinded my orders to Vietnam because he told me you'd never be the same kind of man if you went there. And his name was Colonel Spiesel at the time. He was in the Schools Battalion. And he said he liked me to do it, to be his secretary, because I'd do whatever he'd say. Can you cuss on here?
No,
Not much. Okay.
probably not too much.
Okay. But whatever orders he gave me to his officers that was up under him, I'd give him the orders just like he told me. But that caused problems later on for me in the Marine Corps because he left me about 18 months, and I had to report to some of the officers that I had given orders to. And they were a little bit upset about it because I was an enlisted man. So, but I managed to get on through that.
What would you say the greatest takeaway that you had from the military?
Personal discipline. Personal discipline. There's not anything that you can't do. Adapt and improvise. That is what I have learned to do based on what I was taught in the Marine Corps. Whatever situation is, you adapt and you improvise. And that's the way I've pretty much lived my life, trying to understand what it is I need to do to survive in the situations that I'm in.
So what was your path then after you left the military?
After the military, I came back home. I worked at the Terrell Malibu. I worked at the Coke plant. I was trying to get a decent job. I mean, there was means to take care of a family because I had 2 kids and a wife at the time when I got out of the military. And then I heard about the affirmative action program that was instituted back in the late 60s. And from that program, I reached out to Public Service Indiana and tried to get a job. It literally took me 3 months. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I would go to the HR department on Home Avenue of Public Service Indiana until I bugged them to death and they gave me a chance at the job. And
The rest was history, as they say.
as they say, the rest was history. But I have to say, public service was a great place to be because I could make an income that I could take care of my family. But some of the people that I worked with back then were Klansmen.
Really?
And they didn't like the fact that the affirmative action program was bringing minorities into that company at the time. And they made no bones about letting me know, you're taking a job from my brother, from my cousin, and so we had those kind of situations back then. So much so that I had a friend, he became my friend, his name is Dave Reeves.
Good man.
Dave Reeves took me under his wing because I had an incident where I was told to grab some wires. I didn't have the knowledge of the job. Had I grabbed those wires, it would have killed me on the spot. And he had heard about it, and Dave took me under his wing to teach me the trade so I wouldn't kill myself. So I've been he's been my friend ever since then.
Absolutely. Great man, and I know you and he are very close.
And so I stayed there for about 9 years, 6 months or so. I was hoping to get 10 years, but Marble Hill, they built the Marble Hill plant. They went under because of that. They laid everybody off at less than 10 years. Me and Dave Jones and Greg McCullough was the last 3 they hired, so they let us go. But I stayed in that field, in the public utility sector. And I went from there to Delaware, worked 1.5 years in Delaware, worked 1.5 years in Northern Illinois, then got a job in California.
And spent the rest of your career out there?
The rest of my career in California.
It was a little different than Terre Haute and Vigo County, wasn't it?
It's a lot more liberal. I fit in a little bit more because economically I thought I was doing pretty good, and so when you have a little money you can go places and do things that you never think you could do when you're in a small town. And so I learned to work as hard as I could to make as much money as I could. I thought one day I might be wealthy, but the kids kept coming, the cost of living went higher, and I just began to have enough to get by and take care of my business and my family.
You always kept your connections at Terre Haute and Vigo County, and particularly with your mother. What would you say the greatest thing that you learned, lesson from your mother, for all that she went through and raising 10 children?
I think the biggest lesson from Mom was the fact that no matter what we did, and no matter what she went through, she always still showed us love. Whether it was a hug, whether it was watching her sacrifice to feed us, whether it was taking care of one child to the next child, she always exemplified love, and she always talked about God loving us no matter what happens. And so that is what is the push in my life, to continue to be loving and kind to people, because I saw she even took people in who had nothing, and they may be on the floor beside us, or they may be in the kitchen eating a bologna sandwich or fried potatoes or something, but that's what she always did. And I do the same thing. I think all my brothers and sisters do the same thing. We have almost a predisposition to reach out to those who stand in need. And I love that, because it's rewarding to give and receive something back in return. It was nothing more than a smile. What is it?
Your mother would be awful proud of you, and I know that we had an opportunity to have a public event here in Terre Haute and Vigo County recently that you were an integral part of, and it was fascinating to hear you speak, and particularly talking to you in that public setting, then talking to you more privately, and that kind of permeated everything you were talking about, love, and particularly when the topic really was maybe about a lot of hate and some evil that was occurring back in those days that we were reflecting back on in that event. So talk to our viewers about the event that I'm talking about and how that impacted your family and you personally.
Well, over about the last 3 years, we, working with the NAACP of Terre Haute, the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama, and I was able to visit the museum probably 3 or 4 months before in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was the Lynching Museum, because we had been told that our great-grandfather had been lynched in 1901. And so we started a project, like I said, with the NAACP, EJI, and a whole bunch of the community from the Indiana State University, St. Mary's of the Wood, Interfaith Council, and I can't name all the organizations that got involved, because I don't remember all of them, and I don't know everybody in the organizations. But they got involved with trying to bring the memorial to Terre Haute.
We're talking about your great-grandfather.
Yes, sir, my great-grandfather.
And we're talking about a lynching in 1901 in Terre Haute, Indiana.
In Terre Haute, Indiana, on the
All right.
Wabash River Bridge.
Okay.
And by being able to bring a marker there, we were hoping to lift the veil that's been over our family's name ever since we can remember. And in a way, it has done that. I mean, you bring a marker, it's a sign of forgiveness, it's a sign of love. You can't wash away the past, but you have to realize if you don't talk about the past, you could never straighten the issues out in life. And for us, as a family in particular, we needed to have that stain lifted off of us, because now it's like a new light that shines on the Ward family. We no longer have to look at ourselves as secondary citizens, as individuals who don't have a right to anything, or as a murderer, or as a thief, or as our great-grandfather was accused of being. And because he never had due process of the law, how can you say what he did? And that was the way the system was in the Jim Crow era, Reconstruction period, that a black man wasn't considered to be much. And so we lived with that we were not much.
George Ward was beaten in front of the jail. He was hit in the head with a sledgehammer, so near to where we are right now. Imagine the pain and the fear of no one coming to your aid. George Ward lost consciousness here and possibly still struggling for his life. Then he was dragged across the Wabash River, and while being dragged, if anybody takes a look at the photos that's in the museum, you'll see everyone had a stick. And it was reported as they dragged his body across the river, he was beat with the stick. If he wasn't dead when they hit him with the hammer, he would have been dead after the beatings with the sticks. So George Ward lost consciousness, probably struggling for his life. Then he was dragged onto the Wabash River all the way to the west side of the bridge. And if you look off to your right, there's a balloons going over there by the flag is the place where he was lynched at over there. Can you imagine control of your body and your life now in the hands of a mob? Carried a long distance just to reach the opening where a person could be hung. Then George Osborne was hung by his neck from the covered bridge, and a crowd of white men, women, and children, counted by some to be numbered over 1,000, watched the gruesome spectacle on the riverbanks. George Ward's body was then cut down, burned, and approximately the spot that we see over on the riverbank where if you do the bridge walk, you'll see the flowers when we do that. As the embers of the fire cooled, human scavengers carried away bits of his charred bones and souvenirs. George Ward was denied due process for a crime which he was accused. Killed by a mob that acted as the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And no one was ever held responsible for the lynching of George Ward.
So we're still chatting with Terry Ward, and Terry, a good friend of yours, has just joined the set here through the magic of Chat with the Chair. Where did he come from? So who's the young guy with you over here?
Arthur. And Arthur, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. That's what good friends we are.
Feinsod.
Feinsod.
The way to think of good grass, Feinsod.
Feinsod. So Arthur is a veteran of the Chat with the Chair, right, Arthur?
I am.
So remind our viewers a little bit about your background.
Well, I just retired as professor of theater and the great books at Indiana State University. And that was in May 31st of this year. And I also ran Crossroads Repertory Theater for 13 years and was chair of the theater department for 8 years. So, I've been doing a lot around here.
The Chat with the Chair had an opportunity to be up on Indiana State's campus here in the last week, and what a beautiful theater it is up there.
It is magnificent, absolutely, and it's growing. It's
Absolutely. So if you haven't been up on Indiana State's campus lately, they're on North 7th Street, the theater, and it's just a beautiful building, beautiful structure, so stop up there, and a lot of programs going on. So how'd you get hooked up with this guy?
Well, I'm president of the Interfaith Council of the Wabash Valley, the IFC, which has been a very exciting change in my life, because I never thought I would live to do something like this. But I got involved with the interfaith movement, if you will, from a woman named Terry Fear. Terry was an amazing woman, and sadly she passed in December. But Terry asked if I wanted to be president. When I expressed interest in it, she said, well, not only do I want you to be involved, I want you to be president. So, out of nowhere, suddenly I was president of an organization. I hardly knew what it was. But anyway, I immediately accepted, for I don't know why, but and I've loved doing this. And so Terry had a very interesting kind of spin on what was happening here with recognizing George Ward and the horrible lynching that happened. She said, well, Terry grew up as a Protestant, and she converted to Judaism, and now and before she died, she was a very active member of the United Hebrew congregation here in town. And she said, I would love to see a candle lighting for George Ward and Ida Finkelstein. Ida Finkelstein was the woman who was murdered. And light them together, light a candle for them together. It would be bringing the Jewish and African American communities together. And I thought that was a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, because she died, she wasn't able to carry out that idea, but I wanted to carry the torch for her. So I called Terry and Terry Ward, and said, Terry, I would really like to see this happen, and he was very positive about it. And so 2 hours before the event that marked the historical marker, we had what we called the Bridge Project. And we called it the Bridge Project because we were bridging two communities, the African American community and the Jewish community. That out of this horrific lynching, something good has to come out. And the coming out of it would be bringing the Jewish and African American community together. We've always been together. We've marched together. It was Jewish people and African American people that together started the NAACP. Rabbis were standing next to Martin Luther King Jr. and marching for civil rights, and we have this alliance that goes back many decades. And we thought that this would be a wonderful opportunity because there were two people who were victims of injustice, Terry Ward and Ida Finkelstein. Because there was no trial, she never had her due, and George Ward never had their due in court. And if we assume the presumption of innocence, which we should, and it's one of the pillars of our judicial system, and if we accept that, then George Ward is innocent. He has never been proven to be guilty. Ida Finkelstein, because of the lynching, never had a chance to know who her murderer was. Obviously she died, but she did not have justice done. And so we were going to honor these two victims of injustice together. Light a candle that would start out as two candles and be braided and become one candle. So at the Allen Chapel, and it was officiated by Pastor Tess Brooks Stevens, along with a rabbi, Remy Liverman, who came from Cincinnati. We had the rabbi and the pastor standing at the same pulpit, lighting a candle for Ida Finkelstein and for George Ward. We did that. This was and I dedicated the Bridge Project to Terry Fear, because that was her idea. It wasn't my idea, but I just sort of carried through what she wanted to do. And to me, it was extremely important because we sometimes forget other victims. When there's victims of something like a lynching, there's victims, and Terry has made an excellent point that even his family has been victims of this onus of having had a relative lynched. And that became very important to me. And in fact, I heard Terry talk at the soil collection ceremony, which maybe you folks were at. This was in March, and they collected soil on the banks of the Wabash Valley, Wabash River rather, near where his body was burned. And we collected the soil, and Terry gave a speech there, and I had never met Terry, I just heard his speech, and I was so moved by what he said in his story that I went home and I started working on something which is called the Declaration of Innocence. If we assume the presumption of innocence, then all victims of lynching who never had their day in court must be declared innocent because they never had a chance to prove or disprove or whatever. They have to be out of the presumption of innocence, right? That everyone's innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Mm-hmm.
Because George Ward never had that, he must be declared innocent, and we must have a Declaration of Innocence so that the Ward family today can have that onus lifted off their shoulders. That lynching did not make George Ward guilty, it made him innocent. And let all those white supremacists know that if you do something like lynch somebody, you are making them innocent. You're not proving that they're guilty. You are making them innocent. We should put that in law. Well, this is what I wrote the Declaration of Innocence. I sent it to an African-American attorney in Bloomington, my good friend, Brother William Morris. He put it into legalese, because I don't know that language. I'm a doctor, I'm not a lawyer. And so we came up with this Declaration of Innocence. It was passed unanimously by the Terre Haute branch of the NAACP. It went to the regional level, the state level. It was approved unanimously there. It went to the national level of the NAACP and was approved there. It is now part of the anti-lynching bill that sits in the committee at the U.S. Senate.
Is that
Passed the
right?
House of Representatives, not with ours in it. It passed in the form without our Declaration of Innocence. But they put the Declaration of Innocence within the Senate version. And I hope that that's the version, not only that it passes, but then when they have joint committee, that the joint committee holds on to that Declaration of Innocence, because I think it's an important part of discouraging lynching from ever happening again. Because it's completely counterproductive for those people who think they are carrying out vigilante justice. They're really carrying out vigilante injustice. They are making somebody innocent who may be guilty.
So we may be seeing you testify at some congressional hearings.
I hope not. I hope not, but I'm very...
Well, we hope so, actually.
Well, I hope it passes, and I hope that somebody much more articulate than me is there to defend it, but I really hope it happens. But it all came from what Terry said at that soil collection thing.
Wow, that's...
And then the process has moved along, and we have gotten there. So I just say that because the bridge project, I think, is really important. Terry spoke at the bridge project, so not only did we have the pastor and the rabbi lighting the candles together, but Brother William and I read the Declaration of Innocence that we were co-authors of. But also Terry talked about the influence of the George Ward story on his family, and how this is a kind of liberation for his family. Almost as his brother Ron said, it's Ron Cooper, like he said, it was like a lifting of a curse. All that we did, not just the bridge project, but of course the Facing Injustice, the marker, that whole weekend of activities was lifting a curse.
Had you ever been through anything like the bridge project before?
Well, the Interfaith Council is always, interested in any interfaith possibilities, and I immediately, jumped on this, because here we were, and it was so wonderful to look out at the Allen Chapel and see 50% of the people there African American, 50% of the people there white, a number of Jews, a number of Christians, together lighting a candle for these two victims of injustice. That moves me no end, and that's what the Interfaith Council is all about, is bringing, it's a bridge between religions, but ethnicities that were all part of the same human family. And, as Terry says so beautifully, we have to love one another, we have to be kind to one another, and we have to take a stand against hate. We have to, when hate rears its ugly head, we have to together take a stand. If it's against an African American, Jews need to join in taking that stand. If it's against a Jew, African Americans need to stand together to do that. Any affront to an LGBTQ person, or an African American, or a Jew, or a woman, because of their gender, because of their race, because of their religion, we have to stand and say no. We have to be kind. We will be kind to everybody that we see. But we're not going to be kind when in the face of hate. We're going to say, no, we don't accept that.
So I know you spent a lot of time with Terry over the past several months, gotten to know him, and you've been present for our chat here earlier, and when he's talking about his background. How similar would your raising, your background, your rearing be to Terry Ward's?
Almost the complete opposite. But we do come together in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
I was never in the military, but my father was quite a hero in World War II. He fought at the Battle of the Bulge. There's actually an exhibit for my father in the Military Museum here in Terre Haute. I'm very proud of that, showing him marching after the war and all that, and talk a little bit about his being in the Battle of the Bulge, etc., and liberating a concentration camp, which I found out about much later. So I don't claim anything to do with the military, but my father, fought in World War II, and for him, he came out of World War II, having fought, wanting to end war. I mean, that was his dream. I'm going to fight, I'm going to make this sacrifice so that my kids don't ever have to fight, that there won't be war anymore. So he was heartbroken when the Vietnam War came and it was breathing down my back and my brother's back. he was heartbroken about that because he had failed. He took it very personally that he had failed not to end war, and he fought real hard to end war as a World War II hero, I think. Anyway, so our backgrounds are very different, but we come together so strongly in our commitment to love and kindness and service to thy neighbor and love thy neighbor, all those fundamental pillars of all religions, which is why the Interfaith Council appeals to me so much. In the Great Books program at Indiana State, I taught a lot of the great books of many religions, right? Not only the Hebrew Bible, but the New Testament. I would teach parts of the New Testament as much as the Old Testament. I would teach the Bhagavad Gita, which is the holiest book for the Hindus, and the Tao Te Ching for the Taoists, etc. And what they all seem to come back to is love thy neighbor, mercy, forgiveness, generosity, love. Give the shirt off your back to your neighbor who needs
It's
it.
not a bad transplant to Terrell, was it, Terry?
No, it wasn't.
Think he could have made it up at Highland?
Oh, he'd made it. He'd have made it.
So talk about your friendship with Arthur.
Well, our friendship is really based on godly principles. That he is a person to be honored and respected, just like I want to be honored and respected. I appreciate his insight into the Word of God, and we're able to communicate from that perspective also. Because really it all boils down to whatever we do, we should love one another. We should try to raise our brother and our sisters up. We should support them in what they do, as long as it's something that they're doing to bring forth love and respect and honor to other people. And we have the ability to tell a person when you don't do right. That's the other part of it, Not to put anybody down, but I think that you can combat hate with love. I really do.
That's right.
And so that's what I try to do, and I believe that's the relationship that we have at this point.
That's great. So Arthur, for our viewers, any thoughts, activities that are coming up, or things that might be good projects that people might get involved in that are out there thinking, how can I get involved like you've gotten involved?
Well, the Interfaith Council is always welcoming people to come in, and anybody who feels strongly about their own religion, but also sees that there's many ways to God, to faith, to spirituality, and there's no wrong way unless it's intolerant. As long as it's tolerant, as long as there's love in the heart, all religions are, barking up the same tree. And that's what the Interfaith Council is all about. It's a wonderful group to sit there with, a wonderful array of ethnicities and religions, and all talking the same language, supporting spirituality, religion. We support faith in all people, and we also take a stand against hate. I think it's really important that we do both of those things, because hate is contagious just as love is contagious, and you've got to take a stand against it. And it starts with language, little acts of heroism, which I consider like you're at the Thanksgiving dinner table and your Uncle Roy tells an anti-Semitic joke or an anti-black joke or an anti-woman joke. You get up and you leave the table. That's an action. That's taking a stand against hate. And maybe Uncle Roy will think a second time next Thanksgiving when he starts to tell the same joke, and maybe something in him will realize that maybe I shouldn't tell the joke this time. Maybe saying something when your peers are telling an anti-whatever joke. And just say, guys, I'm not really comfortable with this joke. I know a lot of people that are X, and they're really nice people, and they're not dumb, and they're not da-da-da. So I don't think it's very funny, and it's not representative of what these people are. That's a learning opportunity. That you've just put a seed in their head. Now, you might be unpopular for the moment. They may go say something like, let them say, be uncomfortable. Let them be uncomfortable a little bit, and maybe that night while they're lying in bed, they're going to think, maybe I should think differently about that. and then you've done the world a service. You've made your little combat against hate just by doing something like that. Walking away from the Thanksgiving table, just saying something amongst your friends, not in an unfriendly way, but in a friendly way. I just don't like that joke. I don't think it's very funny.
Is there a website that viewers that is, check out to see, or maybe a way to contact you or
Just
someone else?
Contact me.
What would be
I'm
that
still
contact?
I'm still the Indiana State
Okay.
email, arthur.feinsod@instate.edu, and tell
Okay.
me of your interest. And I would love to send you our mission statement and our 10 principles of the Interfaith Council. We start our meetings with a sharing of faith, where somebody talks about their faith and either an incident of it. And that's how I got to know Terry even better. I invited him to do his sharing faith at the last Interfaith Council meeting. And it was incredible. We were all in tears. This beautiful story about how he came to a much stronger faith. He always had faith, but a stronger faith. And it's an incredible story, and it moved all of us. And it helps all of us, people of faith, no matter what our faith is. I'm Jewish, he's Protestant, we have 3 nuns involved with the Interfaith Council. We really cross the gamut. We have Muslims, Jews, and we're together as friends trying to kind of make a better world. So arthur.feinsod@instate.edu, tell me your interest, and I'll get you on our email list.
For our viewers didn't get to take part in any of the activities of that weekend, are those available anywhere to view?
They are available to view. Dr. Crystal Reynolds
Okay.
will be able to set them up. I don't know exactly how.
Okay.
I know they were on Facebook, and they did some live screening of different newspapers and things like that.
We'll see if we can't track that information down and provide that.
NPR, there's on NPR.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
the Bridge Project was on live stream.
Okay.
And it is on some Facebook sites that I don't quite.
But we've got a crack crew here, Chat with the Chair. So you can rest assured that that's going to be information we're going to put out for our viewers. So, Terry, any final thoughts or words for our viewers?
Final thoughts. Well, I think the best thing to always do in life is to consider yourself first. Not the benefit of all things, but to see where we stand in the injustices in the world. And we're not perfect. People are not perfect. And a lot of times we're led rather than we lead. And if we can start looking at ourselves and see how we are not doing all that we need to do, there's nothing wrong with feeding that hungry man who sits down there by the Kentucky Fried Chicken, sitting out there poor and dirty. Nothing wrong with that. And if we start doing little things like that, maybe the next time it might be somebody who asked you for some place to stay for the night, or a bath for the night. There's nothing wrong with that. Reach out to help those people, and it also helps you also. So that's what I would always say.
That's great.
DEMOCRATIC. Everything you need to know about the Vigo Dem Party. So sit back, relax, and watch from the end.